So I wanted to start with a bit of a question, and I can almost see you, so if you want to raise your hand or yell, that would be great. But how many people here have had a really great idea that ended up being really misguided? Yeah, okay. So, story time. When I was in 5th grade, we had a science fair. And I was super excited to submit a project for the science fair. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I ended up being struck with this idea, like as a really artsy kid who loved to draw, that people without hands can't draw. And this is really ridiculous. Please laugh because it's a funny joke. Like this is a real thing that I did. And so, I decided to create a device that folks that don't have hands could use to draw. And yes, this is completely ridiculous. I was 11, so I think it's important for that premise. So I worked with my dad, who is really into woodworking, to create this device for people without hands that they could draw. Yes, that is 5th grade me, and that is also a ChatGPT recreation because nobody photographed this in 1991, even though it was clearly going to break barriers, it was gonna be amazing, but no. So here I am with my project. I go into the science fair and I'm super excited to present to the judge. So I, walk him through my idea, where he absolutely obliterated me by pointing out that you had to have hands to use the handles in my drawing box. Yeah. Super, just very ashamed, devastated. It was a horrible thing to realize in that moment. And there's a couple of different ways we can take this little story, right? The first one is we need to, when we're creating something for people with disabilities, we need to include people with disabilities, right? Super obvious. It would have taken exactly one person with an upper limb difference to be able to suss this out, right? There's another way we could go, we could realize that this could have some use for folks with maybe low dexterity or something like that if we want to be super generous to 11-year-old Sarah. What I'd like to do instead is to kind of focus on the concept that we all make mistakes, and we always, think that we understand something a certain way, and we don't quite understand it, right? And so that's kind of what we're doing here, right? We are learning and unlearning and working together to figure out what reality actually is. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my first big myth, which is that accessibility only affects a small group of users. And I hear this one all the time from people that make decisions, right? And email is all about numbers, right? Open rates, click-through. Allison's whole spiel was all about numbers. It was great, right? We do numbers. That's our whole jam. Everything we work on revolves around numbers. But does it make sense to not include people with disabilities? No, not at all. Actually, 28% of adults in the US live with some kind of disability. That is not a small number at all, right? That is more than 1 in 4. That is 72 million people in the US alone. And those numbers do kind of extrapolate to the rest of the world. It's a little different, but essentially the same thing. There are a lot of people that live with disabilities that you are not aware of. So my action for you on this one is to go ahead and take a picture of this. I want you to send it to your boss. Whoever sent you to unspam today, I want you to send it to them and just let them know, hey, we're going to talk about some accessibility next week. It's gonna happen. All right, my second big myth is that disabled users don't read my content, right? I hear this all the time. And alternatives of this include people with disabilities don't buy my product or use my service, or I don't see them, so they don't exist, which is pretty horrible. Don't say that. Obviously, people with disabilities do exist, and they are most certainly reading your email. There's actually a name for this effect. It is called the inaccessibility cycle. And that is when we when we have a product or service that is inaccessible, therefore people with disabilities cannot use them, so then we cannot see them or count them in any of our segments. So we think that there's not enough of them to count. So our product or service remains inaccessible, right? So let's think about this a different way. If 28% of your emails went to spam, you would be up nights trying to solve that, right? Like, absolutely, there would be no sleep till we solve this problem. And yet here we are with 28% of the population just not getting your email. So yeah, let's solve this. Let's figure it out. The third myth I hear all the time if you don't get anywhere with the first two, this one is pretty good, which is, oh, we don't need to be compliant. Nah, we're fine. We've got it all under control. It just doesn't apply to us. And there's this idea that HTML emails can't be accessible. And that's not true at all. In fact, they absolutely can meet the criteria for the WCAG, hands down, every day. And even more so, we can pretend that the business communications that we send out don't apply to the ADA or the EAA, and they absolutely do. Just because there haven't been a lot of mainstream lawsuits about it doesn't mean that they don't exist, right? So yes, you absolutely do need to follow these laws. So I did include a little bit of a primer here for you. You can go ahead and take a photo of that and pull it in. It is not an Oracle thing, but it does have a lot of really helpful information that I think is just really useful to kind of get you started. So my fourth myth is that we make our content accessible for disabled people. And this one is kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? Because we all want to be good people. And I do believe that what we're doing when we make emails accessible is a net positive, right? But accessibility is not a gift. So we are keeping our clients from getting sued. So we're keeping them from breaking the law. I don't know about you, but no one has yet congratulated me for not murdering someone, though they absolutely should have several times. Okay. And likewise, we're not doing some heroic deed by making sure our clients are following the law, right? And people with disabilities already fought for and won these rights with the 504 sit-ins, the Capitol crawl, and a whole bunch of civil rights demonstrations that happened probably before a whole lot of us existed. And that's what set these laws into motion, and it has nothing to do with us. So we're not being nice. We're not doing a nice thing. We are helping our clients follow the law. So obviously, please don't stop. Please keep going. We are making so much progress. But just kind of keep your eyes on track here that we are meeting a need for our industry. We're making email better, but we're not saving anyone, okay? All right, so now that we've got some of these big accessibility things out of the way, I want to talk about some of the specific email ones. And I would personally love it if you could raise your hand or holler when I say one that you know you've heard. Whether you believe it or not doesn't matter, no judgment, just having fun. So my first one is people with disabilities use the view online link, right? And this was one of the first ones I heard as a newbie email developer, right? I asked my boss, what is the view in browser link for? And they were like, oh, accessibility. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I told the next person who asked me that question, and they kept repeating it, and everyone kept repeating it, because that's how this goes, right? This is why all of these things exist, because we keep repeating it. So when I started talking to people with disabilities about the view in browser link, they usually said some variation of, why would I do that? So on the one hand, I think they don't know that it's for them. Maybe if we change the name, that would be a little easier. But I don't think that's the right call here. Because if you follow the link on the view in browser link, you're going to exactly the same code that you're getting in your email inbox. There's no difference. So if your email is inaccessible, it is inaccessible on a browser and on an email client. In fact, there's actually a number of different ways where an email client has already resolved some of the common accessibility issues with our messages, like not reading your table as a data table, being able to pause animated GIFs, are all things that email clients generally already do for us. So in reality, your view in browser link is actually a less positive experience than in the actual email client. So, unfortunately, the view in browser link is not a get out of accessibility free card. We still have to do the work, make our emails accessible. I do have a quick caveat that the view in browser link is actually still very important. I do recommend using it. There's enough combinations of screen readers and email clients that are an absolutely horrible experience, no matter how good our code is, that it's worth having. So, closely related is email myth number 2, which is that people with disabilities get the plain text version of your email. So, quick little note before I get too far into this. When we talk about plain text emails, we're generally talking about 2 different things, right? We're talking about the plain text emails that Naomi was talking about yesterday, where we have an HTML email that is just largely text heavy. So maybe a header, a footer. She had lots of great examples yesterday. What I'm talking about is a plain text MIME type that your ESP usually auto-generates and sends at the same time as your HTML email. And folks can choose whether or not they get the plain text version or the HTML version. So in this kind of fictional myth that we have here, we think that people with disabilities are just getting the plain text version, so we don't really need to think about it. So there's 2 problems with this. The first one is, have you ever read that plain text message? Like, it's genuinely horrible. Not to mention the fact that users would have to do a whole lot more work to even get to the link that you're trying to send them to. It is not a positive experience for anyone, let alone someone who's using an assistive technology that takes a few extra beats to get to. The second problem is that if 28% of the population is disabled, and your open rates for those plain text messages are probably way, way less than that, right? So your plain text messages read rate is probably getting way, way lower than that. And so we know that means that people with disabilities are getting the HTML version of your email. So I think there's also this idea that screen reader users get the plain text version. And I just want to kind of dispel that super clearly. There's actually a lot of videos and that show the experience that folks that use screen readers use, and it is getting the HTML version. So our HTML versions definitely need to be accessible. And there's really kind of 2 parts to this one, right? So make sure your HTML emails are accessible, but also make sure that your text messages, text emails are as equitable as possible. Try to clean them up, make sure that they work. Look at them, I guess. So my third email accessibility myth is one that I hear all the time, and it honestly kind of makes me roll my eyes quite a bit, and that is that alt text is all you need to make your email accessible, right? How many times has all of us heard that? Like, all the time, it's everywhere. There's this kind of predominating theory in the email marketing community that the only people that we're making something accessible for are folks with low vision or no vision that use a screen reader. And that is absolutely not true. Let me assure you, if 28% of our population used screen readers and had low or no vision, you would absolutely know. Our entire world would be so drastically different that that can't possibly be true, and it's not. Because the actual population is about 5.5%, I think, of folks with low or no vision. So definitely not true. So all that to say, alt text is super important. And you absolutely must meet the alt text requirement for every image in your email, 100%, even the tracking pixel, do it, right? But alt text does not equate to accessibility. I shared this example a couple months ago on LinkedIn, so you might have seen it before. But this is a screenshot from my oldest kid's email inbox because they use a plugin that changes all of the text on a page to a dyslexia-friendly font. Now, anyone here is a designer, Tyler, I'm sure you're like, what is that? That is horrible, right? This is not something that the Apple team probably is excited about, right? But this is the goal. This is the goal for all of our emails, to be able to be so flexible that folks with disabilities can change it to work for them with their assistive technologies. And there's actually a whole bunch of assistive technologies that have nothing to do with alt text, right? So folks can use a zoom tool, or they can enlarge the text on their device in order to make their text larger so that they can easily read it. What happens when you zoom in on an image of text? It's awful. It's blurry, you can't read it, you're pinching and scrolling, and it's a horrible experience, right? There's also some plugins that you can use for color blindness that can adjust the foreground and background colors of your emails, right? Super cool. Has nothing to do with alt text. There's also different assistive technologies like speech-to-text software that will read all of the text on a page doesn't always read alt text. So again, your alt text completely useless for these groups of people. Obviously, make sure that you are writing good alt text, but the best thing that we can do for our emails to make them as accessible as possible is use live text. And I talk about this one a lot because it's so important. All right, our next email accessibility myth, and I hear this one and it surprised me the first time I heard it, but I'm sure some of you have heard it before, which is that people with disabilities get the fallback version of a Kinetic email, a Kinetic or interactive email. So the iPhone came out in 2009, and iPhones are actually the most common assistive technology in use today. I know you don't think of them like that, but that is absolutely what they are. So loads of folks with disabilities use their iPhone to interact with the digital world. iPhones started including accessibility in like 2009, so that means that since 2009, our emails, our Kinetic emails, have been provided to folks with disabilities. They're getting these emails with Kinetic content that they can't use. So your videos that don't have closed captioning, people with disabilities are getting those. Your carousel that can't be navigated, same. Hotspot, same. So they're getting all of these emails on their iOS mail on their phone, just like everyone else, which if you don't know, the iOS mail app is the most supported for Kinetic content. So that's great. So the only people that are getting the Kinetic or the fallback of your Kinetic content are people who use email clients that don't support that Kinetic content, right? And that includes people with disabilities. So you also need to make sure your fallback is accessible, right? No one likes me when I say this, but aside from my accessible slider, I created an accessible slider. Aside from that, almost all of the Kinetic content that we use in email is not accessible. So we really should not be using it. Or we should do everything we possibly can to make them as accessible as possible. I did a huge deep dive on this on my blog, which you can absolutely read if you want to go super into detail, but if not, high level, don't use them, sorry. This is another one. So back in 2019, someone stood on a stage just like this one and said that Bulletproof buttons are accessible, right? Uses live text. There's no reason to think any more into that. No need to do any testing. That's obviously correct, right? First of all, that person was me, and I'm so sorry. Me and everyone else in 2018, 2019, before we started testing it. But the problem isn't just Bulletproof buttons. It's VML, which is the coding that we use to make sure that Bulletproof buttons, background images, and some shapes render correctly in Outlook. But despite being a Microsoft programming language made for Microsoft products, VML in Outlook causes major problems for screen reader users. Like major. Let me explain real quick. So in some combinations of screen readers and Outlook, a user will not be able to read any of the content inside that VML. In some situations, it will read out that content twice for no good reason. Sometimes you can navigate to those links, but you can't activate them. Sometimes you can't get to them at all. And sometimes it reads out a whole string of horrible formatting that has nothing to do with the content of your message at all. So this is actually one of the biggest failures that I see when I'm doing my accessibility audits. It is a major big deal, and I can't seem to express enough how big of a deal it is. As a bit of a side note, if you don't know if you're using VML, if your buttons have rounded corners in Outlook, or you have background images in Outlook, you're probably using VML. They're everywhere, unfortunately, but they do cause some really major problems. So my biggest advice is to not use VML. We can make a lot of really beautiful emails without using VML. We really have to embrace like a flexible design and rendering solution, because our goal really should be that every email looks different in every email client. Like that's the goal here. We want our users to be able to interact with the content however they best need to interact with it. This is another one I hear a lot. Web accessibility solutions work in email. This is one that I really wish was true, because if I could just use the first solution in the WCAG, my life would be so much easier and I wouldn't have this weird hobby that nobody really understands. Unfortunately, they don't at all. In fact, most web accessibility solutions don't work in email, or they cause lots of other huge problems, or they cause rendering problems. The list is pretty significant. So web solutions like HTML landmarks and ARIA labeled by and all these things that in the web accessibility world are what you use, we have to dig like 80 times deeper, do a heck of a lot of research and testing in order to figure that out. Now, I love my fellow email developers, but when I tell them something, like a problem that I found, they do like 2 seconds of digging, find the first Google answer, and proclaim that the answer. And that's great. But if you're not doing the research, if you're not doing the testing, you really cannot confidently stand up here and tell people what is working and what isn't. Like me and my Bulletproof buttons, right? Like I was like, hey, they totally work, but they don't because I didn't test it. But then when I did test it, I discovered that it was a horrible, horrible problem. We have to test all the time, right? Web developers have it way easier than us, but we already know that because we're in email, right? Like we all have to work 10 times harder than any web developer, and we know that, right? I did want to have a quick other call out here because caniemail.com is an amazing resource. I'm sure at least half of you have heard of it and use it. And that is a place where we can look up attributes and see what email clients they're supported on. And they work really well, except for accessibility attributes. Accessibility attributes in different scenarios work in some email clients and not others. So as much as I love that resource, that's a starting point, not an ending point. So you really have to do a whole lot more testing to really figure this out. I'm kind of zooming out of my email accessibility myths, and I have 2 more big myths that I want to talk about. And this first one is that accessibility only needs to be resolved once. This is another one I wish was true. So I've trained probably about 100 designers and developers on accessibility best practices, right? It's kind of part of my job here at Oracle. And we have some of the best and brightest designers and developers, and we still have stuff that falls through the cracks. Don't tell them I said that. But I mean, realistically, it really does take a lot of work to get an organization on board to create accessible content from start to finish. It is a big lift. You get one new guy, and all of a sudden your alt text is being ignored, or you've got line breaks in your paragraphs, or your heading level hierarchy is just a mess, right? So unfortunately, we do have to kind of keep checking in, keep making sure that we're on track. And unfortunately, because this is still email clients also change what they support pretty regularly, so we have to continue to test and follow up with that as well. My last myth, and this is kind of what I think is the most important one that I'm going to be telling you today, because it doesn't matter what else you know if you don't talk about it. And that myth is that you have to be disabled or know someone with a disability in order to talk about accessibility. And I think there's this idea that you have to be like super passionate about accessibility to talk about it. And I mean, I'm passionate about it, I like talking about it. But honestly, I want you to be able to talk about it like it's just another Tuesday in the office, because that's really what it is, right? Because the work we do here is really important. And we need you, all of you, to continue to work towards this in order to really push this initiative forward to make more of our emails accessible. So no, you don't have to be disabled. You don't have to know someone with a disability. You don't even have to say it eloquently. I don't care if you say disabled people or users with disabilities. It's fine. Just say it, right? Because we have to keep talking about it in order for it to happen. Because it doesn't matter what you thought before, right? Whatever you walked in here thinking about accessibility doesn't matter. It's what you do with it from here on out that is important. So thank you so much. You can find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of my blog posts there where you can read about a lot of what I'm finding. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.